Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I just watched the recent episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds called Subspace Rhapsody, which was a musical episode. And I personally, and this is my personal opinion, I think this is the worst thing I ever watched in my life. This is worse than Spock's Brain. This is the worst episode of any Trek show ever. I was barely able to even go through it. I forced myself to watch it just to make the review, and I regret that decision. I should have just skimmed through it, but no, I actually forced myself to watch it. I admit I made it like double speed a few times just to get over it faster because I personally really hated it. Now, maybe some people really enjoy musicals, they enjoy the songs themselves, maybe they will like it more than me. I personally hated it. First of all, the whole idea of this episode, I will briefly sum it up. The ship encountered some kind of subspace anomaly which is making them all sing instead of talk. They try to explain it with some quantum mechanics, mumbo jumbo, but it doesn't really make any sense. And it was always the case, they always use some kind of subspace anomaly or some quantum mechanics BS to try to explain all kinds of weird stuff, but usually it has some kind of bit of sense in it somewhere, like some possible theory of something. But here it makes absolutely zero sense any way you think about it. And that's one of the problems in the recent Star Trek shows in general, that science fiction became more like fantasy. It's just magical spells and incantations that make things happen. It doesn't have any basis in any kind of scientific theory whatsoever anymore. And if they're going into that magic route, at least make it some kind of alien with superpowers, sort of like a Q alien, some kind of entity that is consciously making them do that for entertainment or something. And then at least it will make a little bit of sense. But here is just some random subspace anomaly which is making all of this happen. So that makes absolutely no sense any way you try to explain it, and that is immediately a turn off for me personally. And if at least it was entertaining, if it was funny, then maybe it could have worked. Like 2 episodes ago we had that crossover episode with Lower Decks, which was also very silly, but because the jokes in that episode actually worked in my opinion, I was still entertained by that episode, and that makes me forgive the silliness of it. But here it was not even entertaining. I mean, the songs themselves, in my personal opinion, were just not that entertaining. I wasn't enjoying watching this at all, and it wasn't even funny in any way. There was the potential of some funny scenes, but even there it wasn't even funny, it was just cringy. Like that scene with the Klingons, which I thought when they were first kind of setting it up, I thought, okay, that will be funny, because seeing Klingons behave in such a silly way might be funny, but even that wasn't really funny. They didn't do it the right way, in my opinion. And it was just terrible in every way. So I will have to give this episode a 0 out of 10. Unfortunately, previous week's episode was actually good. I gave it a 10. But this week's is a 0 out of 10, the worst episode ever. And also there were a bunch of little things that annoyed me. First of all, whenever they zoom out of a window, the scale of the ship looks totally off. Like whenever we see the ship from the inside, it looks huge, with everyone having giant quarters and wide corridors. Everything looks really spacious on the inside. But we have a few scenes in this episode when it zooms out of a window and we see the person still in the window, and then the ship looks way too small from the outside. So it's like the same problem we had in Discovery whenever they showed us the turbolift shafts and it looked like a gigantic city on the inside of the ship, which couldn't possibly fit in the ship. When you look at it from the outside, it looks a lot smaller. So here it's like the same thing. Whenever we see someone from the window and we see the inside of their giant rooms, but there are only a few windows like that. So where is the rest of the crew? Like, where do they all fit in? It makes absolutely no sense. We also have a shot of seeing the bridge from the outside of the bridge window. So once again, the view screen is a window, which we did see in a previous episode, but that was part of a vision by Uhura, so I explained it away that way, that she only imagined the view screen to be a window. But now we directly see that it is indeed a window, like in the JJ movies. And again, the scale looks way off, because the ship looks way too small from the outside compared to the inside. And there was also a scene when Number One and Laan were singing in the ready room, and she suddenly turns off the gravity only in that specific room, and then they're floating, and we see them from the outside as well. First of all, when we see them from outside, it looks like some cheap CGI models of them, and it reminds me of the recent Flash movie, which also had some bad CGI whenever they showed some CGI person, and it looks really fake, like a computer game. So that's how they look like in this shot. And this also ties with the complaint I had a few episodes ago when we saw that scene of Nurse Chapel doing an experiment in sickbay and putting some vials into a centrifuge. And I said, a centrifuge is used to create, higher gravity, artificial gravity for the vials to separate the materials and whatever. And yet they have artificial gravity on the ship, so why can't I just simply adjust the artificial gravity in the right direction instead of using a centrifuge? And one of the excuses was that it's not as easy to set up different gravity in different parts of the ship, but now we directly see that it is very easy. So if that's possible to create different gravity in different areas of the ship, then why do they still use centrifuges in sickbay? So this just enhances my previous complaint in that other episode. There's also a part when Uhura sings and suddenly we see what looks like holograms around it, so it's not obvious if it was just in her imagination, or if it was Subspace itself creating it, or if she was actually using a holographic projection, which is a contradiction with Discovery, in which Pike said that the holograms on Enterprise were creating all kinds of mechanical problems, and they had to rip out all the holograms from the ship and never use it again, which was a silly excuse just to tie it with continuity better. But now we do see holograms, so maybe it was just in her head, in her imagination, I guess. It's not really explained. And speaking of continuity, we have the first mention of Dr. Corby, who is supposed to be Nurse Chapel's fiancé in the future. He's the guy who made himself into a robot in one of the early episodes of TOS. So I was glad to see that they didn't completely forget about it, that they will try to somehow fit into the continuity of that, even though it's kind of sketchy at this point. And it implies that she will break up with Spock because she will go to study under Dr. Corby. And maybe they'll do it in a rushed way, just like that scene when Kirk meets Pike for the first time and says, oh, by the way, you're now commanding 2 ships, so you're now a fleet captain. So I'm meeting you when you're the fleet captain, which was made just to try to fit it with the dialogue of TOS when he said that he only ever met Pike when he became fleet captain, which implied that that was the only time he ever met him, presumably when he took over the Enterprise from him. That's how it sounded like in the original series. But to fit it in, they had to insert that line, which makes no real sense, because why would he even mention that later on if it was such an insignificant event and just one of many times that he met him? And we see Kirk once again on the Enterprise, so he's now like a regular visitor, constantly coming to the Enterprise for some reason. Is his own ship constantly following the Enterprise? It's always so close by that he always drops by for a visit, and so that also is beginning to annoy me. And we have a scene of him and his brother working together on something, and then someone hails them and says something to Kirk, and then they both respond at the same time, and that's the same old joke that they keep doing in all the Star Trek shows, especially in TNG. They were constantly doing that whenever Riker was temporarily the captain and someone said something to the captain, and then both Riker and Picard responded, and then they kind of look at each other. So we had that joke kind of multiple times. Maybe one day I'll do a compilation of all of those scenes. And here we have the same joke of both Kirks responding to the hail and then arguing who it was aimed for. So that was like the only moment I kind of enjoyed in the whole episode. And there's a scene when La'an tells Kirk about that adventure she had with his alternate self and all of that, and he doesn't seem to be at all shocked or surprised to hear that time travel exists and there are multiple versions of him, which people remember, and he's totally okay with that. It's like a normal event, and this is the Kirk before TOS, before he's supposed to even know that time travel is even possible, and he just so casually accepts alternate timeline adventures of other people who met other him, and he's totally okay with it. No shock or surprise at all when he hears about it. It's just some casual mention. He also casually mentions that he's dating Carol Marcos and she's pregnant from him, and that's why his life is kind of complicated, which is also kind of strange since he never mentioned it any other time except Star Trek II, I guess, but all the other times when he hooked up with many other women, he never mentioned that to any of them. So why only now? Is it just an excuse he uses to not get involved with her and in a way that she won't get offended? And yet other scenes he's apparently hitting on her. So when she suddenly admits that she has feelings for him, suddenly he has all these excuses. Oh, I'm dating Carol Marcos once in a while because she's so far away and she's pregnant from me, and so my life is complicated, so I cannot get into a relationship, so what the hell? And the whole thing with the songs that they all sing, it's always about their emotions. It's always, that's another problem that the new Star Trek shows have, that it's constantly about people's feelings and emotions and all of that. It's constantly about it, kind of too much. It's like a bad soap opera. That they're constantly having to talk about everyone's feelings all the time. And when it's overdone, when it's the only thing they ever talk about, it's becoming annoying. And here they're not even talking, here they're singing about it across the ship for the entire episode. So this was absolutely terrible in my opinion. And when the Klingons were first mentioned as being nearby, I thought, okay, we're going to have a scene of Klingons singing, and that might be funny because we actually had some good scenes in previous Star Trek shows when Klingons had their, Klingon opera and actual scenes which with some actual good music of Klingon songs, which were epic and all of that. So I thought for a moment maybe that will actually be funny and good, and yet when we actually get to it, it's just absolutely terrible and not funny and not fun in any way. And they're not singing in Klingon, they're singing some silly song in English, and it's just like a hip hop song or something. It was absolutely terrible. And the only funny part about it was earlier when the Klingons said they were coming there to blow up that anomaly because of their dishonor, because they were so upset about all of that, understandably. So that was the only kind of funny moment when they said they want to end their dishonor. And later on they just disappear and never mentioned again. And so it was also, it felt like a missed opportunity. The Klingon scene should have been much more funny and much more epic, but it was probably the silliest one and not even worth it. So overall, I think the episode was terrible. I did not enjoy it. I do not recommend it. I do not want to ever rewatch it. But maybe some people enjoyed it more than me. Maybe some people really enjoy musicals and singing and all of that. So let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.